I'm fired up, and I've got a big idea that I want to start off the show with as we roll into Friday. Yesterday, a tweet went out to LeBron James from one of the leaders of Hong Kong's democracy protests. And that quote said as follows: this is Joshua Wong, defending democracy is vital, but at King James only talks loud in the U.S. On China, not only is he silent, he actively shuts others up. He called Daryl Morey, quote, misinformed and not really educated, those are quotes, for supporting Hong Kong protests. All he cares about is money, not human rights. Hypocritical. And this, to me, goes to the essence of one of my big issues with American athletes today. And I'm going to explain, and I'm going to tie it in with the U.S. Soccer Federation and them eliminating a requirement to stand for the national anthem. And I think you're going to follow me along on this path. But let's begin here. The great thing about America is you can say whatever you want about any subject under the sun. And the government is pretty much not allowed to do anything at all to you. Your First Amendment right of free speech is to prevent the government from coming and grabbing you and throwing you in prison for what you say. Many people around the world, billions of people around the world, do not have that basic human right. Most of us take that for granted in this country. We don't realize how rare our freedoms are. And so many athletes in America and coaches, whether it's Steve Kerr, Greg Popovich, LeBron James, Megan Rapinoe, they enjoy taking shots internally at American institutions and tearing them down. But they very rarely attempt to share American values around the world. I'm going to start with Megan Rapinoe. Megan Rapinoe in the World Cup recently, she denigrated the President of the United States, had lots of crappy things to say about him, essentially. And she then was not very, I don't believe, useful of her platform in the Women's World Cup. Let me explain what I mean. The reason why our American women dominate in the Women's World Cup is not just because they are more talented than most other women's teams around the world. It's because the women in many parts of the world that they are playing against don't have basic human rights. This is one of the things that bothers me about people who talk about, say, the U.S. Men's World Cup performance as opposed to the U.S. Women's World Cup performance. They're like, well, our women win. Our men stink. Our men are not as good competing with the world because men all around the world get equal, by and large, athletic opportunities. So it's a lot harder for the U.S. men to beat Brazil than it is for the U.S. women to beat Brazil. Because Brazilian men are found at young ages and developed into stars. And this happens for men's athletes all around the world. Whereas many women's athletes aren't allowed basic human rights. It's no surprise that we would be a lot better at soccer than North Korea and Iran for purposes of our women's soccer program because women in those countries don't have basic human rights. And so if Megan Rapinoe wants to speak out politically, what she should do, in my opinion, is point out American exceptionalism and use the U.S. women's soccer team as evidence of how much women can achieve when they are given basic human rights. Because the vast majority of women in the world, billions of them, that's billions with a B, have nowhere near the basic human rights that exist in America. And when you decide that you are going to tee off and criticize and rip America on the world stage, what you do is embolden dictators and autocrats around the world to use your language as evidence of why America is not a shining city on the hill and things are not actually good in this country. And the same thing happens with LeBron James. LeBron James wants to speak out on politics all the time. And I just read you that tweet about Hong Kong democracy protest. But LeBron James is not willing to do two things that I think would revolutionarily change American sports. Let me give you two things that LeBron James could do if he truly cared about making a difference. LeBron wants to model himself on Muhammad Ali. But if you study Muhammad Ali took stands on things that were controversial in the country and were later proven to be true. The things that LeBron says are already popular today. No one is in favor of innocent people being killed in the United States. There aren't two sides to the equations that LeBron James is standing up on. When Muhammad Ali stood up against the Vietnam War, that was an incredibly controversial opinion to have, and he faced real consequences. Time in prison, the loss of his championship. Whenever LeBron faces real stakes, he doesn't take a stand. Let me give you an example. LeBron James makes tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars from Nike. The reason that LeBron makes so much money from Nike is because his shoes are so profitable for Nike. Why are LeBron James's shoes so popular for Nike? Because they're made by virtual slave wages around the world by largely minority populations. Nike goes to Asia and they pay 50 cents an hour or lower to workers in Asia to make LeBron James's equality Nike sneakers. So LeBron James is making money off of virtual slave labor. That's how LeBron James makes so much money from Nike. Imagine if LeBron came out and said, hey, I have seen what's going on in America today. There are 40 million people unemployed, roughly. A huge percentage of the unemployed are minorities in this country. I grew up in Akron, Ohio. I know how important getting a job is. What if LeBron went to Nike and said, hey, I want all of my shoes made in America, and I want all of the workers making them to make a living wage to do so. And if that means that we are going to have a less profitable shoe for Nike, that's okay. I'm willing to take a lot less money to make America a better place and to lift out of poverty tens of thousands of people that Nike could employ in this country to make his shoes. That is a tremendously aggressive statement that LeBron could make that Nike would have to follow. If LeBron James tomorrow came out and said, Nike, I don't want my shoes made overseas anymore. I want inner city impoverished kids to be able to work to make my shoes. I want you to give them a living wage. I want Americans that were asking to pay $150 for my shoes to be able to have jobs that they can afford to buy those shoes for their kids. I would come on this radio show and I would say, bravo, LeBron James. That is a statement worth making. You have made a tremendous difference in the lives of tens of thousands of people who might not otherwise have had a job. And oh, by the way, you would have helped to bring back manufacturing to American shores. That is a move that I can support in a substantial way. LeBron will never do it because it would take money out of his pocket. Similarly, with Hong Kong protests, instead of focusing on trying to score political points in this country, LeBron James could easily do what Muhammad Ali would have done and say, I don't just care about human rights in America, where we have more human rights than almost anyone in the history of the world. I care about everybody around the world having basic human rights. And while I'm focused on Colin Kaepernick and protests in American sports, the stakes for protesting during the American national anthem are relatively small. Nobody's going to go to prison. Colin Kaepernick has actually ended up making far more money as a spokesperson for Nike than he would have as a backup quarterback in the NFL. If anything, he's actually profiting off of his protest. Yet in China, if you protest in Hong Kong or disrespect the Chinese national anthem, you go to jail for 5 years. That's not right. Chinese people don't have basic human rights. They can be thrown in jail if they say something that upsets their leader. If they are the wrong color or the wrong religion, they are sent to concentration camps. There is a battle right now in the world over what is the future of the world going to look like. This is, I believe, the struggle of our era. On one side is the United States saying we support human rights around the world, democracy, freedom of speech, the right of women to go to school, the right of women to be educated, that everyone should be treated equally under the law regardless of their religion or their race or their sexuality. It's very in vogue to rip America today, but we are the shining city on the hill that everyone, in my opinion, around the world should be seeking to emulate. China, on the other hand, is a dictatorship run by autocrats. We have Hollywood filmmakers editing our films if they make Chinese people uncomfortable. You can't use Google in China. You can't use Twitter freely in China. If you say something that upsets a leader in China, someone knocks on your door and you disappear. China is trying to spread their version of totalitarianism around the world. And when LeBron James carries water for China, and when he says Daryl Morey was uneducated, and that and when Steve Kerr says, oh, that's a complex question, when he's asked about whether or not he supports democracy in China, these guys are choosing their pocketbooks over the right side of history. There's a big argument now about what the right side of history is, right? People love to be on Twitter, and if you say something they disagree with, you're like, oh, you're on the wrong side of history. Well, if you're smart enough to study history, you know that very often history takes a long time to figure out what the right side of history is. Yes, sometimes we know in that moment. Hey, the Nazis versus the Allies. Yeah, we were on the right side of history there. We're on the right side of history if you are aligned with American values right now. We already know that. History bends towards equality and righteousness and freedoms and basic human rights. American athletes, instead of ripping America internally and scoring political points from a small segment of the population that hates America and doesn't understand the larger geopolitical stakes, don't understand that what they are doing is being used as evidence of why China is right. China loves to see LeBron ripping American institutions. They love to see Megan Rapinoe ripping American institutions. They are doing the bidding of Chinese autocrats. If American athletes want to get political, by far the most impactful statements they can make is by seeking to spread American values around the world. And so when I see the U.S. Soccer Federation saying you don't have to stand for the national anthem anymore, what that means is we have so many freedoms that we can basically spit on the American flag. We can burn the American flag, and no one does anything to you. If you so much as insult the Chinese national anthem while you're wearing the Chinese uniform, you go to jail for years. In some countries like North Korea, you disappear and you'll never be seen from again. They will literally kill you. And so as we look forward and try to think about what would the Muhammad Ali of the modern sports generation be standing in favor of, it's American exceptionalism. It's using America as the shining city on the hill to send messages around the world that, yes, we may not be perfect. And yes, we have oftentimes fractious elections and disagreements, but the very foundation of American liberty and value is something that should be replicated through our sports and sent out around the world. And what you are seeing is a massive amount of American hypocrisy on behalf of our athletes. They will rip America to the high heavens because it doesn't have any consequences for them. It doesn't impact their pocketbook. In fact, they may be able to make more money in the United States by ripping America. But when you ask them to stand forward and also say the same things to other countries around the world, they are silent. Again, Hong Kong, right now, one of the eternal struggles of our age. China has used the coronavirus as cover to take away basic democracy in Hong Kong. If you protest the Chinese national anthem, you can go to jail for years. If you protest in the streets, you can go to jail for years. That is the law in Hong Kong now. And that's why one of the leaders of the Hong Kong protest has reached out and said, defending democracy is vital, but LeBron James only talks loud in the U.S. On China, not only is he silent, he actively shuts others up. He called Houston Rockets GM Daryl Morey misinformed and not really educating for supporting Hong Kong democracy. All he cares about is money, not human rights. Hypocritical. That's the essence. LeBron won't say a negative word about China, even though billions of people are living without the same basic human rights that he takes for granted because he's worried about his paycheck. LeBron James won't go to Nike and say, make my shoes in this country. I have enough money. I want to give back. I want people to get jobs in this country because it might hurt his relationship with Nike and it might hurt his paycheck. It's not brave to say things that only make you money. It's not brave to only speak out when there are no consequences. In fact, it's the exact opposite. And most in the American media are not smart enough to understand or hold American sports stars to same standards around the world that they would propagate here in the United States. If you want to be on the right side of history, we know what the right side of history is. It's extending basic human rights around the world. The modern civil rights struggle is not being fought in America. It's being fought on the globe. And mostly American athletes are completely absent from that conversation. Why are they absent? Because they're worried about their paychecks. It's the height of hypocrisy. And frankly, it's got me fired up.